Okay, looks like everyone is in, so let's make a start. Just to let you know that this session will be recorded today. So if you'd rather not appear on the recording, please make sure to keep your camera off. And of course, we'll be sending the slides and the recording around after the session to everyone that's signed up, and we'll make it available on our website as well. Before we go any further, I'm George Middlemiss, and I'm leading Regen's involvement in the REACH project. And Regen, if you don't know, is a mission-led organisation, and that mission is to ensure that we transition to a net zero energy system in a way that is both fast and fair. Next slide, please. So REACH is an innovation project, and it's funded by the Strategic Innovation Fund, now, and otherwise known as the SIF. And the SIF is Ofgem's mechanism for encouraging innovation in the electricity networks. And what we're doing in REACH is exploring one potential solution to demand-related grid constraints in rural areas. So it's an issue that needs exploring, and we're hopeful that sort of some version of what we're exploring could be deployed in grid constrained communities around the UK. However, the key purpose of working on an innovation project and on this innovation project is to explore the options and to learn about how the local grid can accommodate low carbon technologies in rural areas in future. So it's really about learning, and that's what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So before we move on to the main session, I'll just quickly run through what we've got coming up. So in a moment, you'll hear from a few of the project partners about the progress that we've made so far and what we're hoping to do in this phase and in any possible subsequent phases. You'll then be hearing from my colleague Jeff about the role of communities in this project and how we've engaged with them so far and their role going forward. And then finally, you'll hear from another one of the project partners about a potential tool that we're looking to develop the specification for that could make it easier to access this kind of solution in the future. And then we'll be finishing off with a 15-minute Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. So just before I hand over to the project partners, I wanted to give some background to this project and set it within the wider context of decarbonisation in rural areas. Next slide, please. So many of you are on this call because you're interested in decarbonising rural areas. So you may be interested in projects relating to transport, so maybe advocating for alternative transport options to personal fossil fuel cars, whether that's active travel, better public transport, car clubs, or personal electric vehicles, and making sure that there's the charging infrastructure for them. On the heat side, you might be working on projects relating to improving the thermal efficiency of buildings through retrofit programs, both to reduce emissions of homes and businesses and to ensure that the local people can afford their energy bills. You may be offering energy advice or behaviour change programs to enable and encourage people to use less energy. And you may also be interested in encouraging the uptake of low carbon heat technologies such as air source and ground source heat pumps. And then, of course, there's industry and rural industries like tourism and farming and thinking about how those can be decarbonised. And of course, the decarbonisation of power as well, and making use of the natural resources around rural areas to ensure that they are able to generate new renewable energy. So clearly, rural areas have a wide range of decarbonisation priorities that they could be focusing on. However, in REACH, in this project, we're primarily focused on enabling communities to access electric vehicle charging and electrified low carbon heating, so heat pumps. And rural areas have some unique challenges when thinking about the decarbonisation of heat and transport. Next slide, please. So on the heat side, we know that many homes in rural areas are off the gas grid with oil fuel boilers having higher emissions than gas. Buildings tend to be older, with some traditional buildings being harder to treat with standard energy efficiency measures. And then, of course, Due to homes often being spread out, there may be more limited heat network opportunities than in an urban situation. On the transport side, being spread out also leads to poor public transport often. And as someone who grew up in a small village, I can attest to that. And similarly, there's often less public charging facilities and bigger gaps in between those charging facilities, meaning that those without the ability to charge at home may not have anywhere to charge. And then, of course, one issue that affects both heat and transport in rural areas is, and a key decarbonisation issue that we're focusing on in REACH is the challenge of ensuring that the local electricity networks can accommodate electrified heat and transport. Next slide, please. So there are also some opportunities in this space and lots going on. And we're going to hear more about the grid constraints in a moment. But before we do, I wanted to highlight a couple of those opportunities. And of course, there's many local authorities and community energy organisations across the country are working on low carbon heat and transport projects. But I just wanted to highlight a few examples to give you a flavour of what's out there. Next slide, please. So Charge My Street, it's a brilliant social enterprise. They've installed over 200 EV charge points to date, and their model basically works by a member of an area might suggest the need for an EV charge point, and then Charge My Street will do all of the groundwork to get that charge point installed if it's deemed as feasible. So that would include initial investigations and funding and things like that. So a great one to take a look at. And they can also support in helping to engage the community to use the charge points. Next slide, please. The Local Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund. So this is government funding to enable local authorities to develop plans and deliver electric vehicle charge points across the country. There's both capital funding to install the charge points, but also capability funding to enable local authorities to have the team to make it happen. With over 185 million awarded so far this over the past couple of years, it's going to really increase the amount of charge points available across the UK. And Devon, where I'm based, was awarded 7 million. And their strategy had a particular focus on charging points on residential streets in rural and remote areas with electricity grid constraints. So there are electric charge points hopefully coming to these rural areas. I believe this fund is now closed. I'm not sure about that, but as it's been distributed over the last couple of years, we should start to see those charge points coming over the next months and years. Next slide, please. And then moving on to the heat side, I wanted to highlight people-powered retrofit. There are, of course, many community organisations providing energy advice and retrofit services across the UK, and I know that we've got many of them on the call today. The reason I wanted to highlight people-powered retrofit is because they also offer training and advice to community organisations and local authorities looking to increase retrofit in their community. And this includes, helping new organisations to establish a retrofit service, training for their core team members, or training for the community members themselves. And they've even got some specialist software to enable a smooth retrofit process. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on the boiler upgrade scheme and warm homes grant. So I'm sure many of you are already aware of both of these, but just in case you're not, the boiler upgrade scheme provides grants of up to 7,500 for ground source and air source heat pumps and grants of up to 5,000 for biomass boilers. It's running till 2028, but I believe it's a fixed pot, so it's kind of a first come, first serve thing. And in April of this year, we'll see the launch of the Warm Homes Local Grant, which is a follow-on from the Home Upgrade Grant. And this will provide grants of up to 30,000 for low-income homes with an EPC of D or below to install low-carbon heating and to make their home more energy efficient. So yeah, just wanted to highlight a few of the opportunities out there. Next slide, please. We'll include links to those examples in the follow-up email. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a snapshot of some of the things already going on in this space. However, I wanted to be clear that what we're doing in this REACH project is kind of one step removed from those projects. because REACH is primarily focused on how the grid can accommodate the new low carbon technologies that would be adopted through the kinds of schemes that I've just outlined. Next slide, please. And this is because local grid infrastructure, so electricity cables and substations in some rural areas, are near full capacity, meaning that they're moving around as much electricity as they can. And in situations like this, the distribution network operator, like National Grid, will carry out works to increase the capacity of local networks. So taking out old cables, pylons, substations, and upgrading them with new, better ones. However, a lot of the electricity network is quite old, and the adoption of electrified heat and transport has ramped up quite quickly. And therefore, the DNOs, distribution network operators, have a long list, or will have a long list of areas to reinforce. And that means that some areas won't be reinforced for a while, delaying the installation of low carbon technologies and holding back the ability of some communities to decarbonise. Hence where this innovation project comes in. This project is exploring how rural areas can electrify heat and transport ahead of the grid being upgraded. So hopefully that has given you some good context for the project overall before I hand over to the project partners. So with that said, I will hand over to Lawrence from National Grid to talk more about what we're doing in this phase and in future phases. Lawrence.
Thank you very much, George, and good morning, everybody. So next slide, please. So if asked to picture a rural community, I'm sure many of you would picture a romantic pub walk followed by a trip in the countryside, or maybe just the rolling green hills and sheep, which we're accustomed to in the UK. But unfortunately for me, having worked at National Grid for the past few years, I can't get the image of overhead lines and pole-mounted transformers out of my head. I don't know what happened, but at some point between starting my job here and now, I've developed a magnetic gaze towards electrical infrastructure. So looking at a typical community here on the screen, you can see the long 11 kV network, or as we call it, the HV network, delivering electrical capacity into a village. It's there stepped down to the LV network, shown in blue, by either a pole-mounted or a ground-mounted transformer. In rural communities, there's a greater prevalence of overhead conductors transporting power, such as the image shown on the screen, across fields into communities, and within the villages itself. Often we have overhead LV cables and sometimes underground cables too. The way in which that power is stepped down is mostly with pole-mounted transformers in rural communities, and these were often installed many years ago. Up until recently, this has delivered more than enough capacity, but as we adopt low carbon technologies, we do risk the network becoming overloaded, as George outlined. If we could move to the next slide, please. Delving into this in a little more detail, comparing a primary substation, which is a substation that feeds many communities, in a city against a primary substation supplying a rural part of our network, the difference in topology is quite clear. In cities, we see a smaller number of much higher capacity secondary substations. That's the substation that goes from HV to LV. And often these are ground mounted, delivering up to 1,000 kVA in individual substations. In rural areas, we see a greater number of lower capacity pole-mounted transformers, as illustrated on the right-hand side of this slide. In addition, we often see much longer, lower capacity overhead lines, which are more costly to replace, and in some cases may require completely new circuits to deliver that electrical capacity to communities, which would require new wayleaves and consents to install, which is a very costly and timely endeavor. If we can move to the next slide, please. If we then consider one of the rural primary substations that we've been evaluating in this project, which typically supplies around 1,000 people for context, and apply the forecasted uptake rate of these low carbon technologies, we begin to understand this problem in a little bit more detail. Starting at a maximum demand of around 13 MVA, By 2028, this could rise to around 16 MVA with an additional 2,500 cars and 1.2 thousand heat pumps. But by 2034, with an additional 9,700 electric cars in this area, this demand could reach over 30 MVA, which is over double the initial maximum demand that we would experience on this substation, which would likely require an intervention. On the next slide, you're going to see what this could mean to a rural community. The HV network may become overloaded with thermal constraints, limiting the amount of power that we can transport through the network. And the LV network may also become overloaded, with the pole-mounted transformers acting as that bridge between the HV and LV, being a critical blocker in this adoption. What this may mean is we may need to reinforce the HV cables, which is typically quite an expensive and timely intervention. And that LV network may require completely reconductoring, which would often incur roadworks and quite a lot of disruption, as well as being a very costly and timely delay to the adoption of these communities. It's worth noting that this is a problem that NGED are used to, and we have got used to installing equipment on our network over the years. But we do want to make sure that communities that are ahead of the curve and are wanting to adopt these technologies before our predictions are able to do so in a timely and efficient manner, which arrives at the two problem areas that we're wishing to address with this project. On the next slide, we're going to have a look at these. So we want to explore the new ways in which electrical capacity can be delivered in a timely and cost-effective way to these communities that are ahead of the curve, so that the capacity is there when you want it, not when we've provided it to you. And we also want to develop a tool which provides greater clarity on how a community can achieve these decarbonisation goals. We know that there are many ways to solve these kinds of problems, but there's often a bit of confusion about which is the most appropriate and which would maybe deliver the most carbon reduction and is most cost effective. So we want to develop a framework that can help address some of that uncertainty and provide greater clarity about which pathway is the best for individual communities. So how are we going to do that? If we can move to the next slide, we're going to have a look at the two capabilities that we're developing. The first is the Reach Energy Centre, which combines battery storage, EV charging heads, and local control to manage power in a community. The battery will be able to take in power when the demand is underneath the rated capacity of our network and store it so we're able to supply power to the local area when the HV network is constrained. We're also going to be exploring the use of smart heat pumps, where the low voltage network can be managed effectively by heating homes when there is capacity to do so, and perhaps preheating homes so that when we have a peak demand, the home is already heated. We want to evaluate the effect of this energy centre on our network, and we're working with communities to develop case studies. We're also performing cost-benefit analysis and carbon assessments to make sure that what we're doing stacks up from a financial and carbon perspective. The second capability that we're developing is, as I say, the decision support tool, which builds upon the methodology that we're establishing in our case study communities to make a repeatable approach that can be applied to other communities in the future. And we're evaluating alternative ways to deliver this decarbonisation as well, making sure that we explore what is out there in the industry at the moment to make sure we're delivering the best possible outcomes to the communities. I'm now going to hand over to my project colleague, James, who's going to talk through what the energy centre may look like in more detail.
Thank you, Lawrence, and hello, everybody. So I'm one of the project partners I'm actually from VPod, working on the REACH project. And as part of this, it's really our responsibility to design the modular energy centre. And the key concept behind this is that we've heard a little bit about some of the potential future constraints. And so what we're looking to do is build a local power source, which is able to provide additional power at peak times to meet that increased demand from low carbon technologies. And in addition, provide EV charging points at the heart of the community. Next slide, please. So I apologize to everyone if this slide is a little bit busy, but I'll talk you through some of the key points here. So centrally, the large kind of box you see in the middle is our central energy storage module. This is effectively a box full of batteries. And what this will do is, through the switchgear module on the right, will enable us at times when demand is low to recharge those batteries. And then when demand suddenly becomes much higher, we will be able to export the power stored in the batteries through the switchgear module back into the network to provide ample local power and enable all of the low carbon technologies to actually occur in the households. Joined directly onto this system will also be an EV charging skid, where we will be able to provide electric vehicle charging facilities. And part of the assessment that we're doing during this stage is to actually understand what type of EV chargers should we need to provide. Would they be a number of maybe lower output chargers for overnight charging, or a couple of very fast chargers to enable a kind of a quick top up in a timely fashion? We are also exploring whether or not we may need an additional backup generation module just to top up the batteries at times of peak demand. And that's part of the assessment work that we're doing at the moment. Critically, all of these pieces are controlled by a central control system. So we have some smart capabilities. So we will be able to look at future forward demand, etc., and then actually calculate that to optimize the rates of charging that happen between the system, the outputs, the EV charging skid, and the support that we provide back to the local community through the network. I did see a question pop up there. I think there's a question session at the end, and I'm more than happy to address things at that point so we can stay on track. Thank you very much. I'll pass back to George.
Thanks, Gary. Lawrence, I believe you had one more. Sorry, thanks, James. I think, yeah, Lawrence, I think you had one more slide. Oh, no, straight over to passive.
Morning, everyone. Hello, my name's Matt Osborne. I am one of the project partners. I work for Passive UK. We're a UK-based energy and technology company that's been working on software solutions to decarbonise homes for over 15 years, and I've been working in this space for even longer, including working with low-carbon communities. So we specialise in predictive machine learning control algorithms to manage flexibility of homes and how to integrate these into wider energy systems. So we know that reducing emissions from home heating will be critical for the UK's transition to net zero, and we want to be able to help communities understand the available options to achieve this. And in this project, our main focus is carrying out detailed simulations of what the electrical demand from a community that a DNO needs to manage will look like, particularly when you've got large clusters of low carbon heat pumps on these distribution networks, and understanding what the sort of peak power loads will look like under various different conditions from different types of properties under different usages. And then what we're going to do is understand how different methods are available for smoothing out these peak demands from groups of heat pumps are available. And then finally, we look to explore different ways of linking these groups of heat pumps within the community back to the local energy centre, which James has described there. So with the end goal of being able to help the local community be managed better and managed within the constraints that Lawrence has described beforehand. That's me. So thank you. I'll pass over to Lawrence.
I think it's me next. Thank you very much, Matt, and thanks, James, as well. So just looking ahead at our two delivery streams, we are underway right now with the initial assessment, working closely with 7 community groups. And we've been evaluating the feasibility of this approach across these 7 sites, and we're going to be looking to take forward 2 of these community groups that are most aligned with the kind of solution that we're offering to a detailed feasibility stage over the next few months, where we can understand how the technology performs in a technical way against managing network loading, in a cost-benefit way, and looking at the carbon assessment. Furthermore, we are currently working on the decision support tool architecture. We're looking across the industry for other innovative ways to deliver electrical capacity and we're building an architecture for how this tool may be brought to life in the subsequent stages of this project. So we're going to be asking questions around what would a tool like this really need to be able to do to be able to benefit community groups? How can it benefit the network operator as well? And we're going to arrive at a system that can be developed in the next stage of the work. Jessica's now going to talk through the role that communities have played in this work, I think, and then my colleague Gary is going to talk through some of the more detail of that tool.
Great. Yep. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm the REACH lead community contact. Within the REACH project, one of Regen's primary role is to engage with the communities. And so we support the project partners to learn more about these rural communities, which then helps them to ultimately identify which communities may be most suitable to test the REACH solution. Next slide, please. So we really appreciate all the communities that have engaged with us so far in this process. So originally in March 2024, we had first an expression of interest, which we had 82 communities respond to. We then held a workshop, which about 70 people attended last March. Of those who were interested from that workshop, 32 filled in this really detailed questionnaire about their rural area. We then followed up with a select number of applications to find out a little bit more information in order to make our final selection. And from this process, we were able to identify 7 communities which have similar ambitions to those of the REACH project, but also had kind of some of these grid constraints that we're looking to solve through this project. So, for example, all the 7 communities that we selected to move forward are really working to decarbonize their local areas and also have those key grid constraints. Next slide, please. Just to show you the kind of spread. So these communities are spread across NGED's network, representing varied villages and what they're trying to achieve, as well as the types of grid constraints that they are facing. Next slide, please. And just to say that we're now moving into the alpha phase. And this phase kind of aims to test the solution to the problem that we identified in the discovery phase. For example, whether the REACH solution would be suitable for specific communities that we've identified. And so in the first part of this initial phase, we're working with all of the 7 communities before selecting 2 villages for detailed feasibility studies. And one of the key things that we're really trying to understand in this part is whether this modular energy center, like the type that we're developing in REACH, would be appropriate for each of these communities, or whether a more traditional approach, for example, a grid upgrade, might be better, or some other kind of opportunity. And while previous stages, such in discovery, may have included whether the community organizations aligned with the project goals, really selecting the 2 that move forward really focuses on the technical reasons for suitability. Things that we're trying to evaluate at this stage include things like specific grid constraints, space within each of the villages for a modular energy center, whether they have particular planning or local challenges, as well as the community's interest in the work that we're trying to do. So once we have all this information, the project partners are going to come together and decide based on a variety of these criteria, and that will help us decide which 2 will move forward to full feasibility. And then we'll move into the second phase, which will be the full feasibility work with the 2 communities. And this part will involve actually visiting the sites and working out the technical aspects of whether the solution is viable and appropriate for these areas. And so if at this stage the project is successful and we find that we have a suitable solution, we'll then be applying for beta funding to demonstrate this project in one of the communities. And while only one kind of can go through to that demonstration part, assuming that we're successful, this would provide learning for a wider array of communities to understand if this would be a good solution that NGED could implement a bit further down the line. So just to end, I just want to reiterate how grateful we are for the time that communities have put in already to Reach, and we're really looking forward to seeing what comes out of this next phase of Alpha. I think I'll pass back to George.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jess. Yeah, we'll hand over to Gary in a moment to tell you about the tool. But if anyone's got any questions about what you've just heard, please do drop your questions in the Q&A function, which is on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll come to those at the end of the session. I have seen some people post them in the chat. I'll try and pick them out as well, so no need to put them in the Q&A. But any new questions, please do put them in the Q&A. And with that, I'll hand over to Gary.
Good morning, all. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible because it's clear that there's a lot of questions coming in, and we're to the Q&A after this session. I wanted to just set some level of expectations around what's happening in the alpha phase of the project. We have previously done discovery, and that was a classic situation of the networks having identified that there was an engineering issue and thrown engineers at it. So as a result of that, we have come up with a number of different ways in which an energy centre could be applied in order to address those issues. However, it's became very apparent within the discovery phase that the real value within the project is to the communities. And within the communities, they are largely all different. So as a result of that, we recognised that there was a need to be able to help escort communities through the process, which is undeniably complicated, looking at the challenges of the engineering network, bringing together the different parties within the communities to understand what their future needs may be. But it's also worth highlighting as well that for probably the majority of rural communities, this Reach solution is the exception rather than the rule. But what we want to do is ensure that there is ample capacity within the network so as not to hold back any communities as they want to take up electric vehicle charging and heat pumps and any other low carbon technologies that are available. So for this round of the trials, we'll be focusing very much on the options tool and trying to better understand and put new processes in place that allows us to engage more effectively with communities to understand what the subtle nuances and priorities would be within each community. You can have the next slide, please. So what we've been looking at is a process where we would engage with the community. This is probably going to be triggered as a result of a growth within the requirement for capacity within the network, which is accelerated ahead of the models that the NGED are using. All of the DNOs in the UK have developed probabilistic models to understand when the likelihood of reinforcements will be required. But if we consider people within the households will make the decision when to choose their car and when to go electric based upon their needs. And similarly, looking at things like heat pumps, it's probably because an existing heat pump is an existing heating system is coming to its end of life, and therefore there is going to be a relatively narrow period of time during which they want to be able to make that choice and go ahead. What we don't want to be is in a situation is where we are saying to communities, yes, we're delighted that you're looking to proceed with low carbon technologies, but can you please wait because we can't offer you the capacity. So working within that, what we would do is, in fact, next slide, please, at this point, is within the process, there's multiple parties that will be feeding into and out, getting outputs from it, with NGED being the first party. Next slide, please. So NGED is likely to, as a result of seeing connections or doing their annual monitoring on the modelling, recognise that there's an acceleration in the growth of capacity that is required. And as Lawrence alluded to earlier on, it's not always quick and easy to do it within rural locations, particularly if those are being fed by multiple kilometres of overhead line. In order to do that, you need to have access across the fields to restring the line, and as well as that, poles and things like that may need replaced. So you can potentially be looking at a couple of years in order to do one of these upgrades. So what would happen in that situation is NGED would identify the communities who are the exceptions rather than the rule, and invite them to access the tool. We would set up an account for them, give them login details. Obviously, the community itself will need to establish who within the community is going to actually interact with that and provide answers. But essentially what we do is ingest all the data that we hold regarding the network, which reflects some of the concerns that we have with regards to the capacity, so that when a community logs in for the first time, next slide please, the community will actually see a list of relevant questions. Now, we appreciate that that bringing together the parties within the community is no easy task, and therefore what we've set the system up to do is be able to run and operate on a very, very basic set of essential data fields that to be input. Many of them are going to be provided by the ingested data from NGED in the first place, but the community can then add in information if they know the number of households that have electric vehicles, or over the next 4 or 5 years are going to desire to have electric vehicles. If there's any planning being submitted for any new additional housing going in, these sort of parameters that wouldn't necessarily be available from NGED's perspective, just looking at it from a arm's length through the data they collect back from the network. We'd be seeking for the community to input the information from their own point of view in order to give us a better indication of what the future demands on the network may be. Now, so our next slide, please. VPOD similarly have a whole load of information which will answer the questions from the community, but there's a bilateral relationship between the two, as in the community may not know exactly what it needs, and it needs to see the cost of that and how big it is and what it looks like and where it could possibly be located before they can give a reasonable answer. So it's important to note that the tool will remain open and the community will be able to iterate the information going in and out. Next slide, please. In order to come to a better understanding of what the community needs are based upon the parameters of what the VPOD solution can provide. From an NGED perspective, it's very much about resolving the constraint issues in order not to hold back the opportunities to uptake LCTs. But from the community point of view, they may wish to take advantage of the fact that there's these works going to take place to have additional components such as the EV charging, etc. And we're working with, you'll note there's a couple of additional partners there in orange, is Frontier Economics. Are doing a series of modelling work to look at the different ways in which the elements which aren't bound solely to providing the additional capacity that's needed, but actually looking at economic opportunities. And that could be through using the batteries in order to help balance the network, to help deal with constraints at higher voltage levels. It could be through the EV charging and being able to charge for on-street EV charging, which I saw was referenced in a couple of the questions that came up already. And similarly, from Cranfield's perspective, taking a very academic approach to this, the real driver behind this is reducing carbon. So again, the tool will incorporate a carbon impact assessment. So if we understand the number of vehicles that are going to be shifted from petrol or diesel, moving across to electricity, or indeed same with the heating, we'd be able to give a better overview and understanding of what those impacts would be. Next slide, please. So finally, what we would have here is a number of parties feeding in, and over a period of time, preferably weeks rather than months or years, is essentially get to a point, and it's important to note that the options tool is not expected to be like going onto Amazon. You're not scrolling through options to then add to basket and then purchase. It's really to get to a clear point of understanding between the different parties, primarily NGED, the VPOD and the community, as to what the size and shape of the optimized solution for that particular community would look like. And then at that point, it would shift to a more engage face-to-face type of engagement to discuss the options available and answer more direct questions, come down and see the community itself and move on. This is really for the options tool, it's the start of the process rather than being the process in its entirety. But it is the focus of this phase, and hopefully it's perceived as a decent way of helping the communities navigate this complex process and identify what benefits the communities best. So at that's me finished. I'll pass back to George, and I think he's going to take us into the Q&A.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gary. So yeah, we'll be shortly moving into the Q&A. So if you've got any questions, please do drop them in the Q&A function, which is on the bottom of your screen, the question mark in a speech bubble, and we will try and get as many of them possible answered. Tamar, if you could bring the slides back up, please. I've just got one more slide to go through. I just wanted to let everyone know about what's coming next in terms of us communicating about this project and opportunities for communities to feed in. So in March, we'll be holding some interviews to gather some insights from community energy stakeholders on that tool that you've just heard about. So we want to understand more about what would make that useful and usable for community energy stakeholders. In the post-event email that I'll send out, there'll be a link that you can express interest in being part of those interviews, and there will be vouchers for those people who do participate. And then towards the end of this phase, so around this phase ends at the end of May, but towards the end of this phase, we'll be holding another event where we'll be able to share more of what we've learned through the next few months. And this will be a longer session where we'll try and really share everything that we've learned, and hopefully we'll have some positive news to share about what we've learned as well. But with that said, I'm sure you've all got lots of questions, so let's move straight on to the Q&A. I'll try and go, there's a few questions in the chat as well, so I'll try and flick between the two. But one question that came up in the chat was, could a community earn an income from a VPOD? Maybe I'll go to James in a second, but I just wanted to address that on the sort of more addressing that more broadly. One of the kind of principles that we're looking at is that, EV chargers would, a community might be pursuing an EV charger project where they would receive some income from those EV chargers. And that is very much the kind of, if a community was wanting to pursue EV chargers and earn income from that, that would be something that a project like this would want to support, and it wouldn't be trying to take that income from that community. But I guess, James, specifically about the VPOD, could a community earn an income from a VPOD?
Trying to
Got you.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, is the quick answer. We are doing a complete kind of, the Frontier Economics are doing a complete assessment in terms of understanding the best kind of financial model in terms of ownership, revenue streams, etc. This is a project designed to support communities with their low carbon technology ambitions. If there is an opportunity for that community to generate an ongoing revenue stream from the project, then I think that's a fantastic thing, because it brings in the community, it adds value to the project as a whole, and it's certainly something that I'd support and would be advocating for. It's not in my specific remit as one of the project partners to actually make decisions in terms of the best model for that. As I said, that's down to Frontier Economics, but as a group, we are trying to find a good solution that actually really benefits the community in that transition. And if part of that is to also have the ability for that community to generate an ongoing income from the energy centre, then I think that's absolutely in the wheelhouse of where we need to be.
Great, thank you, James. Did anyone else, any other project partners want to come in on that? If not, I'll move on to the next question. So this one came up in the Q&A. Would the VPOD be a solution for community use during an extended power cut, e.g. linked to a community building?
Yes and no. There is power available within the energy centre for export to the network at times of constraint. The reason for that power cut would need to be considered before you can say yes for definite. It depends what has gone wrong at that particular moment in time. In theory, yes, it might be able to provide kind of backup power should there be some form of power cut, but it depends why that power cut has happened, and that would probably be something that National Grid would be able to answer more effectively than me. We have power available we can export, but it's a network issue as to why there might be a power cut, and depending on that, I would assume that the answer may be yes, maybe no, but perhaps Lawrence would be more informed than me.
Just coming in on that, yeah. So it does depend on whether the network has been isolated and correctly before before power could be sort of provided by the VPod. That would require, if it was a National Grid power cut, a National Grid engineer to come out and make it safe. That would be one of the use cases that we could explore. And certainly building resilience in rural communities is something we are very keen to do. But it would be more like if you have a power cut and a generator is put on the network for a temporary piece of time, rather than an immediate, it kicks back in, like if you're in a hospital and the backup generator kicks in because of how the network is islanded, etc. in that case. So it wouldn't be an immediate fix, but it could be something we could provide akin to a generator that's put on during a power cut.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. Hopefully that answers your question.
Can I just jump in additional to that? It is worth noting that due to the modular structure of it, even in a situation where due to the type of fault that occurred, that you couldn't actually support all the households, etc., within the network, there would still be significant scope that you could actually isolate the EV charging, so that if nothing else, the unit could actually support people being able to charge during a power cut. But as well as that, if the power cut is local, and in fact there's planned maintenance happening at higher voltages, which could be several miles away from the community, by having the flexible asset contained within the network, it's possible, again, as part of the earning revenue streams, is if there's sufficient flexibility, the network companies are now moving more so, if they can, to avoid having to take a temporary diesel generator and deploy it in the network to cover maintenance if there's assets that are already connected to the network at lower voltages below the point of constraint. Those can instead earn an income from actually doing the network support during planned maintenance events and things like that. And that is one of the things that Frontier Economics will be incorporating into their financial modelling, is to look at the broad range of opportunities, as well as the immediate engineering benefits to the local community as well.
Great, thank you, Gary. Next up, I'll take the question. I think this one is for me. By registering for this workshop, will we get an invite to the event in May? Yes, everyone who's signed up will get an invite to the event, the next event, and hear about anything else that we put out as well. Okay, question for VPod and passive. Not sure that we'll have an answer to this, but it'd be interesting to see. What is the approximate predicted load percentage for heat versus transport as part of the work done so far? James or Matt?
I'd love to throw the hand grenade over the wall at Matt on this one. So if you want to pick up first, I'll try and recover afterwards.
It's a real sort of how long is a piece of string question, really, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, we haven't done the research on the specific communities because we're still working with them. Once we get into the next phase and we've identified the target communities we're going to work with, that's when the detailed work starts to come in. I think the question was probably more about percentage split. And again, I think it all depends on percentage uptake of either technology. Are we talking, because you can have a lot of sliding scales here. You can have lots of EV to uptake and not a lot of heat pump, versus switch it the other way around. So we're going to do a number of different simulations within the next phase, where we'll look at particularly high levels of heat pump uptake, for example. We're going to try and push the model as far as it can go, so we can understand the limits and the capacities that particularly the community and the VPod can offer. That's the main thing we're trying to achieve, because we don't want to keep coming in and replacing things. So we're going to be looking at some extreme examples, cold weather scenarios, large scale heat pump uptake, large scale EV uptake, that sort of things, to understand what the limits are of the system so that we can design it from that point of view. So it's not really about sort of splits of one technology versus another. It's more about trying to understand sort of capacities, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you, Matt. James, did you want to add anything?
I will. I've had a chance to sort of think about it a little bit. Yes, I'd mirror what Matt was saying. The other thing I think is also kind of quite relevant to say is that it is very community specific in terms of potential uptakes of either technology. One of the things that we're hoping to achieve with the options tool, which is being developed by the project partner SGC, is that each community will have a chance of kind of modeling what their community looks like. So, what is the potential uptake of EVs? How many have got today? What does the what does the heating mix look like? And then the tool should actually provide, as it's kind of, various options out. And this will be an interactive thing. So what should be able to happen, or my understanding of how the tool should work when it's fully built, is that you can kind of start with one assumption set for your particular community, plug that in, see what the results come back and look like, and then go with a different assumption set just to actually see how the numbers change and how the modeling changes. So that's very much driven around the work that SGC is doing to actually answer those specific questions, but we're not quite there yet in terms of being able to give you an answer today.
Great, thank you, James, and thank you, Matt. Ross, I see you've got your hand up, but we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm keen that we move on to another question. Maybe we'll be able to circle back to this one if we've got time. But moving on to another question, would the VPOD be a suitable addition to the local community energy project, e.g. a wind turbine? And similar question, could a VPOD be a solution where there is a significant consistent constraint on solar farm export?
Potentially, yes, it would be absolutely in the wheelhouse. So it is, the energy storage system would enable effectively to recharge from that community asset at times when there was an export constraint. And then when there was less of an export constraint, over time, actually export back out to the network. And so it would act as a buffer specifically for those things to hopefully enable a greater number of connections for community, larger scale community LCT projects to gain a connection. So certainly I understand from kind of looking at the kind of the Ofgem information in terms of kind of future challenges and things they want to consider, actually accelerating connection time for kind of those types of assets is on that list. And so if we could actually look at how best this energy centre could help achieve that goal as well, then that would be fantastic. So yes, that's very much in our thinking at this time.
Great, thank you, James. Question in the Q&A, when do you expect the options tool to be available? Gary, come to you in a second, but just my take on this is, at the moment, we're very much still understanding what that tool could be and what it would do and how to refine it. And it's certainly won't be developed in this phase. If this project continues and we're successful, then it is something that we'd look to develop in the next phase and over the next sort of few years. So it's very much not something that's going to be, in the next few months or even year, if at all. Gary?
So the architecture and all of the algorithms and mapping of the different data fields against each other and dependencies are all in process at the moment. What we're not committed to doing is actually building that and hosting it in this phase. The nature of the SIF funding from Ofgem is once we come to the end of this phase, we need to apply for the next round and it'll be awarded based upon success. We would like to think that based upon the success we had in Discovery to Alpha, that we will see the same from Alpha to Beta, and one of the high priorities at that point will be building the tool to use and be used more widely, knowing that at that point we're moving forward with National Grid considering using reach energy centres in the future. What I would say is the process is going to be employed within this phase, however, on a manual basis. So that relationship between the data and the questions, we're going to be testing that in a manual engagement with the communities that have been shortlisted and specifically the ones that will be taking forward with the application. So all the principles in place in terms of the tool actually available, I would say probably a year is where I would kind of place it if it's going to be built.
Thank you, Gary. quick question for Matt. Are you considering electric storage heaters in the project?
Not specifically, no, not within the first scale of decarbonisation. We're looking at a number of different low carbon heating pathways. So we're looking at different ways that communities can decarbonise, but not specifically storage heaters.
Great, thank you, Matt.
If it was controllable as a switchable load that we could get APIs for to connect to, there's absolutely no reason it couldn't be included. So thank you for whoever put that in there. It's been sitting slightly outside of scope, but more than happy to bring that in as an additional field in the options tool.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, we've got a question here that I was slightly resisting because I'm not sure I've got an answer to, but it'll be interesting to kick it around and see where we get to. But this question from Graham on how will you ensure fairness across rural communities? If it were to be implemented top down, then a consistent approach would be ensured. However, if the demand is driven by individual communities, then he who shouts the loudest might result in a sporadic and unfair implementation across all rural communities. I'll come in quickly and then hand over to anyone who wants to speak about it. But
I'll take that.
I think, George. Okay, I think ultimately the solution that we're looking to develop would be sort of an option that is available to all communities, and there wouldn't be the only sort of criteria would be that there was a constraint in that area. And if there was a community organisation in a particular area that was developing a project that would be better served by this solution, then they would be able to access this tool. So in a way, it is top down in that this would be available to everyone. And I can kind of understand that in what we've done so far has been quite selective, and we've been trying to pick individual communities to work with. But that's just to help us kind of find a good test case to learn from. So yeah, Gareth, do you want to come in at all?
So it's worth noting that going back to the exception rather than the rule is this is really primarily coming from the basis of communities that would experience unwanted delays in being able to access the upgrades to the network. That would be the conventional way of approaching these types of challenges. So there's already going to be a short list number of communities in that case. The NGED is really only required to provide the energy centre for the period of time until reinforcement takes place. So it might be a temporary solution for 2 to 3 years from NGED's perspective, after which they could take that away and deploy it to another community. What we don't want to do is miss the opportunity that presents, is engaging with the community to say, we're going to be doing enablement around a temporary solution. Here are more permanent aspects that have an enduring positive impact on your community. Sizing up with the community, identifying what the correct spec would be, and then presenting a number of options. Whether an external third party funds that and you just take the benefit of the increased functionality to the community, or whether the community wants to fund that or take a loan to that effect so that they will have the benefit. So what we're trying to do is rather than have a top-down or a bottom-up, it's being employed in exceptional circumstances in the first place. But if that is happening, we want to offer the maximum range of options so that the community can take advantage of those, whether self-funded, whether just taking advantage of the functionality, or some sort of hybrid of both.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
I know we're running out of time, George, but just a really quick point from a VPOD perspective. We have to look at the difference between this project and actually kind of the business as usual potentially that might come after that. So this project is sort of seeking to put together, hopefully, if we get into through into beta funding, etc., a testbed model of a version of a rural energy centre. If that is successful, then the hope would be that can then be made available to all of the communities that experience the particular kind of constraint, which is going to be the exception rather than the rule, and make it available to them. And the final point is that certainly this is not a one-size-fits-all. We've heard about some communities that might wish to put in place, a connection to an alternative community-scale low-carbon technology. There are some communities that might be more focused on EV, some more on heating, etc. We are trying to design from BPOD's perspective, a generic modular system that would be that can be kind of sized according to the specific individual needs of that community. So this project is really about proving the concept as a whole, but hopefully the output would be a solution that's applicable for all communities without kind of favoritism to any particular one, that meets their specific need. And should it then be one of those communities that happens to be the exception rather than the rule, then we have something that we could make available to them, which has been properly designed, costed, carbon certified, with a potential revenue stream for that community, hopefully.
Great, thank you, James. We'll leave it there for questions. I'm really sorry if we didn't get around to your question, but we'll do our best to answer some of those questions and send it out with the email or as a follow-up. But yeah, we're over time, so just to say thank you very much for your participation and for all your great questions. Really looking forward to keeping engaging with you throughout this project. And of course, thank you to Lawrence, Gary, James, Matt, and Jess for your presentations. Yeah, we really look forward to sharing the rest of this project with you. But for now, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks,